Last week in Michigan politics, as America marks 2 years since the Supreme Court ruling that repealed the nationwide protection to have an abortion, how the conversation in Michigan is still taking center stage in this key election year. Plus, a state lawmaker arrested in Lansing, what police are telling us and why he's saying he's innocent. And as political season heats up in West Michigan, candidates and parties descending on Grand Rapids, what they're doing to court voters in this key battleground region. I'm Josh Alburtus, and this is your 13 on your side rundown. Two years ago this week, the U.S. Supreme Court announced the decision overturning the constitutional protection to have an abortion. Now, as we approach another election season, it's still a big issue for many. We spent weeks talking to lawmakers and community members about where the debate stands here in our state. June 24th, 2022. The day the nation's highest court repealed the constitutional protection for abortions.
No justice! No peace!
For some, a day of celebration.
This is a huge win for life, a huge win for human rights, and protecting the sanctity of human life.
For others, a day of devastation.
They have worked to keep us down. They worked to keep us enslaved. They worked to keep us out the polls. They worked to keep us out of political offices. They worked to keep us in the home. But we know, as we fought for centuries, that this will not stand.
The decision sending shockwaves throughout the nation, including here in Michigan, as word spread of what had happened.
I have 3 daughters. They're all in their 20s. And I could not stop thinking about what does this mean for them? What does the world look like in a post-Dobbs world, in a post-Roe world?
And I just remember thinking, of course this happened. And it's a call to action, it motivates me every day.
Other onlookers remember that day much differently. That day when that decision came down, what went through your head when you heard the news that that had been the court's decision?
It was an extremely joyous day. It was almost an unbelievable day. And I was at home on that day, and for the first time, I turned the TV on in the middle of the day to watch the celebrations in Washington, D.C.
Stateside, the court's decision galvanizing efforts that culminated in the passage of Proposal 3, codifying Roe-like protections into Michigan's Constitution. But in the 2 years since Dobbs, almost 24 other states have put restrictions in place. The issue only growing more pivotal for many as another election season looms, and some in the community fear the possibility of a federal ban that could override state law.
For me and my friends, there's a lot of fear. Luckily, we know here that in Michigan we have the right to choose, and there's a codified right to abortion, but in other states where we might move after college, that's just not existent in other states. So there's a lot of fear across the board.
A fear many others share.
They're going to try and tell you that overturning Roe 2 years ago was it. That was what they aimed to do. They had a 50-year plan. They overturned it, and now they're done, right? Please, please don't believe them. Look at what they do and not at what they say.
But others see some politicians' use of the issue as concerning.
My concern right now is that a lot of candidates are using the threat of a national ban as a political maneuver to get votes, and I think that is a disservice to women and to voters.
But it's a seemingly uphill battle against public opinion for abortion opponents in this key state. A March poll from Quinnipiac finding that roughly 2/3 of Michiganders polled believed abortion should be legal in all or most cases.
It's very disheartening to hear that people believe abortion should be a right. And what it comes back to for us is we need to educate more. We need to educate on fetal development. We need to educate on options that are available for women, opportunities for them to make that very courageous choice for life.
But with what they say has been seen since the fall of Roe, some believe it's all on the line this November.
The cruelty and the confusion and the chaos that both patients and providers are living under, we now understand what that reality looks like.
But where both sides seem to agree is where they say this fight will continue on, with them and their allies on the front lines of one of the most divisive debates in America.
Most people I talk to are very hopeful about the upcoming election, but they do understand it's going to take a lot of work, And even that work can just be talking to family, friends, putting a yard sign out, educating yourself on all the position of the candidates, but we're very hopeful.
And here in Michigan, a 24-hour waiting period for abortions in this state has remained in state law after Democrats failed to repeal that language last year. But on Tuesday, a Court of Claims judge ruled to block that waiting period. The judge ruled that the waiting period was at odds with the Michigan Constitution, given the amendment voters passed in 2022, known as Proposal 3. The judge issuing a preliminary injunction blocking that waiting period from being in effect while a legal challenge moves forward. According to reporting from the Associated Press, the judge also blocked parts of state law that required abortion providers to give information about adoption and depictions of the fetus, as well as a requirement that only a physician can perform an abortion. And Kent County is at the center of the political stage. Once again, candidates and campaigns from both major parties have been in our area. Last week, we heard from a top candidate for a key U.S. Senate seat and a top choice for Donald Trump as a possible pick for the vice presidency. All eyes on Kent County as West Michigan has established itself as a center of the political sphere. No more so than on Thursday, when top players in key races descended on the area to spread their messages. On the same day, the county playing host to Democratic Congresswoman and U.S. Senate candidate Alyssa Slotkin.
I'm really honored to be here, and we were talking in the back room about how far we've come in just being able to talk about this issue.
And North Dakota Republican Governor Doug Burgum, seen by many as a top contender to be former President Trump's vice presidential pick.
You got an entrepreneur who takes a risk with his wife, starts this business, and now creating jobs and creating community. What's going on here? I mean, how do you have a better morning?
Both parties focusing on what have emerged as largely successful issues for their platforms. For Republicans, the state of the economy.
When I say election's going to turn in a place like this, it absolutely is, because this is where the everyday working American who's got a job and they've got a paycheck, and they come and then they get hit in the face with inflation.
And for Democrats, access to reproductive health options.
They came for us. They came for our rights. They came for our daughters and our granddaughters. They brought this fight, and we cannot let them win this fight.
The two sides clashing in a region that's set to be a key deciding battleground in a key deciding state come November. A northern Michigan lawmaker is claiming innocence after being arrested in Lansing on June 20th. According to a spokesperson for the Lansing Police, Republican Representative Neil Frisky was arrested after officers responded to a report about a man with a gun and possible shots fired around 2:45 a.m. That spokesperson told the Associated Press the arrest was, quote, for a felony level offense. No official charges have been filed against Frisky, but Ingam County prosecuting attorney John DeWayne has asked the Lansing Police Department to continue their investigation. DeWayne told 13 on Your Side in a statement that during the police's initial investigation, investigators learned of a possible sexual assault of an adult female. Frisky has continued to maintain his innocence since the arrest on the 20th, including while recently appearing at a moderated Petoskey Chamber of Commerce candidate forum.
I'm thrilled to be here tonight, and I mean that literally. I'm thrilled to be anywhere that's not a jail cell. Let me first address the elephant in the room, and let me be as clear as I possibly can be. I was arrested and held due to some false accusations. I was released with no charges. I did absolutely nothing wrong, and I'm certain that when the police are done conducting their investigation, I will be completely exonerated.
The investigation into Frisky by the Lansing Police Department is ongoing. To the state capitol, the Michigan House of Representatives recently voted to expand mental health services for veterans. 4 bills passed in the House will expand these services through the creation of an Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention in the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency. The legislation also sets up mental health programs that include a one-on-one mentorship and support to currently serving service members and veterans living in Michigan. The bill also allows development of a program focused on mental health, well-being, and suicide prevention in conjunction with nonprofit organizations. The legislation passed with bipartisan support and are now referred to committee before heading to the full Senate. A package of bills aimed at increasing penalties for animal abuse was passed with very little opposition in the House. The bills will increase penalties for some forms of animal abuse, add companion animals to sentencing guidelines, as well as increase penalties for animal cruelty committed while using a weapon. The legislation comes after a 2023 incident where a resident shot and killed his neighbor's dog and received a probation sentence for the crime. That's what bill sponsor Stephanie Young wrote in a release. Advocates worked with legislators to craft the package of bills that would increase animal cruelty penalties. The bipartisan legislation has been referred to committee before it can be sent to the full Senate for a vote. And coming up months after lawmakers here in Michigan passed multiple new laws aimed at firearms reform, the Supreme Court issuing a ruling on a key firearms case. And just days later, advocates in West Michigan rallying to continue to recognize the impact of gun violence. We have the latest on their efforts and how the Supreme Court ruled. Months after lawmakers in our own state passed multiple new laws aimed at firearms reform, a major ruling from the United States Supreme Court upheld a federal gun ban for those who are subject to a domestic violence restraining order. ABC's Terry Moran has more from the Supreme Court.
At the Supreme Court, a rare victory for advocates of gun safety laws. By a vote of 8-1, the court upheld a federal law aimed at keeping guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, upholding a law that prohibits people who are subject to domestic violence restraining orders from possessing a firearm. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, we conclude only this: an individual found by a court to pose a credible threat to the physical safety of another may be temporarily disarmed consistent with the Second Amendment. The case centered on Zaki Rahimi, a Texas drug dealer with a history of domestic abuse who was arrested after a shooting spree and charged under federal law with possessing a firearm while under a restraining order. Rahimi's lawyers argued the Second Amendment guaranteed him the right to have a gun. But the High Court ruled that the Second Amendment has limits, and on this issue, it can be a matter of life or death. The statistics are clear. A woman who lives in a house with a domestic abuser is 5 times more likely to be murdered if that abuser has access to a gun. Today, Lachey Crachan is lucky to be alive. The 45-year-old mother of 2 was shot 5 times by her ex-boyfriend in front of her daughter.
They listen to survivors. They listen to us. Because it's not a day, a minute, or a second that we don't think about it.
Justice Clarence Thomas, the lone dissenting vote, warned that today's decision could be the start of a slippery slope and contradicts a major Supreme Court ruling in 2022 that held that new gun laws must be consistent with this nation's historical traditions of firearms regulation. Thomas writing, not a single historical regulation justifies the statute at issue, therefore I respectfully dissent. But Chief Justice Roberts argued that today's decision was based in history, in tradition, but also in common sense. Since the founding, our nation's firearm laws have included provisions preventing individuals who threaten physical harm to others from misusing firearms.
And here in Michigan, even in the wake of new state laws, the push for more gun safety continues. In Grand Haven, a silent march was held to recognize the impact of gun violence. Organizers say it was a poignant moment of recognition for the community.
I think people know that we have gun violence in our midst, but what they probably don't know is that there are ways to prevent it. And it's going to take a complex solution to a complex problem, but there are ways forward. So that's what the march is about.
Michigan State Police are also reminding families that there are thousands of gun locks available for free. The state says state funding of more than $500,000 purchased 75,000 cable-style gun locks. You can get one at most county Health and Human Services office and some health departments across the state. One local developer at a major project in Muskegon got a notice from the state last week alleging multiple violations of environmental law and their permit. What the state is saying was done at Adelaide Point and how the developer is responding. That's next. The state of Michigan has notified the developer of Adelaide Point, the new marina in Muskegon, of environmental and permit violations. We spoke with both the state and the developer to find out what's happening. The development of Adelaide Point in Muskegon has been moving right along.
This whole place was created for the public to enjoy. We have the Adelaide Point Powerboat Weekend this weekend. We got all kinds of cool boats that are going to be in the water.
But not without complications. On Monday, the state's Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy issued Adelaide Point a violation notice.
Didn't ask a whole lot of questions and then kind of abruptly left. And I got a call on Monday that said I was going to get a letter regarding some violations that they found.
Eagle says it found multiple violations of environmental law and the company's permit.
I think that the letter sent out something that is incredibly one-sided and doesn't capture the entire story of exactly what happened here.
The founder of Adelaide Point taking issue with some of the alleged violations.
They said that I widened the fuel dock by 5 feet, which I did, but I took away even more dock square footage than what was in our original plan. So, like, everywhere we could, we tried to improve things, and I think we did a pretty good job of that.
Eagle also saying it found, quote, unpermitted filling of wetlands, extensive installation of rock riprap in areas that were permitted as natural shoreline project mitigation, and widening the peninsula into Muskegon Lake. When it comes to the filling of wetlands, Liesma says that didn't happen.
We staked out where all the wetlands were on that entire peninsula, and when we trimmed vegetation, we specifically stayed out of all the areas that had hydric soil.
In a statement about the notice, the department saying in part, quote, Eagle anticipates conversations with the developer to discuss resolution of the violations, which could include fines and requirements to remediate environmental damages that are occurring or will occur as a result of the unauthorized work.
It's a partnership with Eagle. I very much appreciate the partnership of the executives of Eagle, but I think that, the staffers did a poor job.
While conceding mistakes may have been made during the development, he says he believes an agreement can be reached.
I'm confident that we're going to figure it out with Eagle because they're going to see exactly what we've done here.
After-school programs represent something very important and special to many in our communities. And as the state legislature prepares to pass a final budget any day now, many are waiting to see what kind of support these programs can expect. Coming up, how 4 West Michigan students got the chance to advocate for their programs and make their voices heard in Lansing.
One Good Thing is sponsored by LaFontaine Lincoln Grand Rapids.
4 West Michigan students have made history. They got the chance to meet our state's decision makers, and those meetings may impact the future of education in Michigan. 13 on Your Side's Matt Gard shows us their unique opportunity in his latest One Good Thing.
Coming here, it just feels like a second home.
After-school programs are helping the leaders of tomorrow academically, socially, and creatively.
We have math tutors, and sometimes we have an English tutor that comes in. And then we also do like life skills.
Just ask the inaugural class of Michigan After-School Youth Ambassadors how much that out-of-school time means to them.
And I've grown as a better leader. I've learned what it feels like to find a place to belong.
Only 8 students from across the entire state were chosen.
They looked into our essays, they looked into our backgrounds, they looked into every other question they asked us, and they were like, this person would be the best fit.
4 of them are from West Michigan. Sydney Reed from Shelby and Riley Reisinger from White Cloud, along with Sean McDonald and China Jackson, both from Grand Rapids.
I was over the moon excited, and over the phone I got a whole bunch of congratulations. I was very thankful that they believed in me enough to put me up there.
We were doing monthly Zoom calls, learning how to write professional bios, and them explaining what advocacy is.
But the pinnacle of the program was a trip to Lansing for what's called Capitol Day. Ambassadors met face-to-face with the lawmakers who make decisions for their communities.
Going into the office, you saw a lot of the stuff from like Hart and Shelby and Ludington, which is close by, like here. So it was cool seeing like stuff from our community instead of just them being a speaker and doing stuff that Capitol people do.
They made sure after-school programming continues to have a place in the state budget.
That's how they get us stuff to do, experiments and stuff for our science part of the after-school programs, but then there's the funding for like field trips and the food.
China even gave a speech on the Capitol steps talking about how much her mentors mean to her.
I did stutter a couple times, I'm going to be honest, but I had really fun doing it because it's giving me practicing things that I may want to be later in life.
Capitol Day was just day one for these rising stars to become the leaders of tomorrow.
It really does feel nice. I feel like maybe even God chose me to be in that moment, be in the program so I can become a better person.
And that's the rundown for your week in Michigan politics. Be sure to keep up with all the top political stories of the day, both on air and online at 13onyourside.com. We'll see you next week.